You know, some movies have iconic lines that really evoke the feeling of the film, like, "Remember who you are," or "The Force will be with you, always." For Highlander, I'd probably go with, "What the hell is going on?" I'll explain shortly. This is Old, New, and Now Playing. Hello and welcome to Old, New, and Now Playing, your time machine through the world of movies. I'm your host, Will Robinson Smith, and if this is your first time joining me, thank you so much for checking out this channel. Now, of course, this series is meant in part for film fanatics, and will be a great opportunity for you to reminisce about some wonderful movies of the past, but it's meant primarily for folks like me, film fans that love the cinema but just haven't had an opportunity to see tons and tons of movies. And so we'll be looking at film throughout the decades based on the title. Old will be looking at movies from 30 years and older. New will be within the last 30 years. And Now Playing, of course, are movies that are still currently in theaters. And since we'll be talking a lot about movies of the past and movies of the present, I thought it was also important to have a segment talking about movies of the future. And so we'll start every episode with a movie news segment that will talk about things like casting announcements, new trailers that are dropping, new projects that are getting off the ground, all those things. And so we'll start every show just like that. And without further ado, let's get right into that segment, which I like to call The Rundown.
Don't say it! Don't you say it!
And left.
Come on!
In today's rundown, we'll hit sci-fi, more box office news, and crime capers. Let's get right into it. First up, in a Deadline exclusive, actor John Boyega is set to join the sequel to the 2013 film Pacific Rim. The Star Wars The Force Awakens star will play the son of the character played by Idris Elba from the first film, which was written, produced, and directed by Guillermo del Toro. This rendition will be directed by Stephen S. DeKnight, whose producer credits include the first season of Netflix's Daredevil and several episodes of CW's Smallville. I really loved the energy that John Boyega brought to The Force Awakens, and I'm very curious to see what kind of character they'll craft for him in this Pacific Rim sequel. And I really enjoyed the 2013 movie, so I was just happy to hear that they were going to make a sequel in general, and I think adding John Boyega is nothing but good news. And according to Deadline, production on this film should start sometime in the fourth quarter of this year. And speaking of The Force Awakens, Collider reports that the 6-month domestic run of the Star Wars juggernaut has finally come to an end. All in all, the movie made about $937 million. That far surpassed the domestic box for James Cameron's Avatar, which ended its domestic run with about $761 million. However, Cameron still dominates the worldwide box office, with Avatar holding the top record with $2.788 billion, and Titanic in second with $2.186 billion. The Force Awakens sits at a respectable third, having made $2.068 billion at the global box office. And of course, fans of the Star Wars franchise have plenty to look forward to, with Rogue One: A Star Wars Story coming out in December of this year, Episode 8 coming out in December of next year, and an untitled Han Solo movie coming out in May of 2018. And finally, we'll wrap things up with a new heist movie that we can look forward to. In another Deadline exclusive, The Theory of Everything director James Marsh has been brought on by Working Title to direct a movie about a group of robbers nicknamed the Over the Hill Mob. The story will be based on an article published in the March 2016 edition of Vanity Fair. The piece tells the story of a robbery at the Hatton Garden, which netted the criminals about $300 million. As it turns out, the crooks ended up being, quote, a group of tough guy retired criminals in the late 60s and 70s with all kinds of physical maladies who were mostly bored until they consulted a bunch of how-to books and figured out a way to pull off one last hurrah over a long weekend in April. One member eluded capture with $15 million, but the rest were eventually brought to justice. As you can tell from this poster behind me, I'm a big fan of the theory of everything, and so reuniting that crew for a movie like this I think sounds fascinating. I mean, we've seen what James Marsh can do when taking real-life material and translating that to the screen, so I think this is definitely one to watch out for. I'll keep you up to date, of course, on any new casting developments as they come. And so guys, now that you're all caught up, let's head into our main segment, your feature presentation. The 1986 movie Highlander stars Christopher Lambert, Clancy Brown, Roxanne Hart, and somehow Sean Connery. They also got Connery to come back for the sequel, but we'll stick with this movie for now. Highlander tells the story of a man named Russell Nash, played by Christopher Lambert, whose true identity is Connor MacLeod. The movie goes back and forth on what he is called, but for the sake of this review, I'll just be calling him Connor MacLeod. MacLeod is part of a race of immortals who have existed for thousands of years, mostly hidden among the rest of humanity. We learn that while immortals live mostly in isolation, a time will come, called the Gathering, when they will all assemble to fight for dominance and a mysterious prize, bringing to bear the movie's tagline, "There can be only one." Honestly, I thought the first 15 minutes or so of this movie were actually really entertaining. There's a good fight sequence in the underground garage, which uses some cool cinematography. It finishes when MacLeod cuts off his opponent's head and creates a surge of power. The scene gives a little bit of the flavor of what we should expect, but mostly keeps it shrouded in mystery. The movie then flashes back in time to Scotland in 1536 AD, where we witness Connor MacLeod heading into his first battle. MacLeod supposedly dies in that clash at the hands of the film's villain, Victor Kruger, played by Clancy Brown. Seeing that he doesn't in fact die is our first indication that MacLeod is indeed immortal. It's right about here though where the movie loses me. The dialogue up until this point has been fairly sparse, which apparently was not a bad thing. Back in present day, we see police somehow become instantly aware that a murder has occurred and bring MacLeod in for questioning. This scene is awkward because, beyond the aforementioned Scottish battle, this is the first time we really see Lambert act with dialogue. This is really where I start to realize that the writing in this movie isn't very good and Lambert's acting doesn't lend it any favors. In light of the murder, we get introduced to the only woman in the movie with some kind of depth to her character, Brenda Wyatt, played by Roxanne Hart. She's an antique aficionado who works in the homicide department of the NYPD. She discovers the sword of the deceased immortal and tries to track down MacLeod for more information. I should point out that in this movie, immortals can only die by having their heads chopped off. And while we're talking about it, this film also relies on heavy exposition to make anything make sense, and I use that term very loosely. On top of that, there are plenty of things that just aren't explained throughout the film. Like, how do these immortals sense each other to engage in fights? Or when Kruger, who is set up as the villain who wants to be the last immortal to use this mysterious prize for evil, fights MacLeod at the beginning of the movie, why does he just stab MacLeod in the chest instead of cutting off his head? Or why do some immortals seem to age more slowly than others? Could it be based on when they were first supposed to die and then they just stuck with that age? Who knows? The film just kind of glosses over those points. When Sean Connery shows up about 40 minutes into the movie, I felt hopeful that perhaps he could bring some quality to the picture. Simultaneously, after watching 40 minutes of this movie, I was more confused as to why Sean Connery would want to be a part of this mess at all. Fortunately, Connery is a world-class actor and was the only character in this movie that had some subtlety to him, but with the writing in this film, that doesn't go very far. He plays the immortal Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, who decides to train MacLeod and teach him about the immortal community. It's hard to convey this movie well because it really doesn't hold together on its own. The movie is directed by Russell Mulcahy, whose directing credits prior to this project are mostly made up of music videos like Duran Duran's Rio, and Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart. And that's one of the glaring problems with this movie. It has no consistent tone. There are times when it feels like a music video, due in part to the featured music of Queen. Other times it was trying to be an action movie, then a fantasy film, and none of them really click. At its core, this could be a compelling story, the tale of a man who is among a race of immortals who are drawn together and fight to become the last of their species, but I felt like the execution of this movie was just so scattered that it really couldn't create a cohesive film. But apparently there was enough good within this movie that it spawned 2 sequels and a television series, and I think I can see what some of that good might be. The core story is somewhat good, and has moments of good action. It introduces some new Queen songs into the world, including one of my favorites, Who Wants to Live Forever.
to live forever.
And it does feature some glorious shots when they go back in time to Scotland. But what I think makes this movie attractive to many, enough to give it a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, is that it's one of those movies that is bad enough that veers on the threshold of being somewhat good. There are plenty of moments of unintended humor throughout the movie, and it gets so ridiculous at points that it's almost like a bad car wreck that you just can't look away from. I give Highlander a 4 out of 10. I can't call this a good movie, but if you really know what you're getting into, there is some fun to be had with this film. My overall sentiment, though, is still...
What the hell is going on?
Yeah. So, those are my thoughts on Highlander. When you see the movie, if you see the movie, what did you think? And of course, what are some of your favorite one-liners? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And we'll end this episode of Old, New, and Now Playing with my Common Thread challenge. In any given week, all the movies I review will be connected in some way, shape, or form. So, were you able to figure out what links this movie to Monday's movie, Murder on the Orient Express? The answer is Sean Connery, who starred in both films. Now let's see if you can figure out the common thread between Highlander and Friday's movie Warcraft. If you've got it, leave your answer in the comments section. That'll do it for today's episode of Old, New, and Now Playing. Remember, if you ever want to have a movie-related question featured on this show, whether it be about the movie I'm reviewing that day, or movie news, or just a general movie-related query, you can always tweet at me. My handle is @W_Robinson_Smith. Just use the hashtag #PopTweets so I know it's a question you want to have featured on this show. Or you can send me an email at oldnewnowplaying@gmail.com. Just put Pop Tweets question in the subject line. Guys, that'll do it. Let me know if you decide to watch Highlander. Love to hear your thoughts. And I'll see you on Friday with my take on Warcraft.